9 a.m. on the U.S. East Coast, 8:51. Today's date, I believe, is the 18th, or is it the 19th? It is the 19th. So it's November 19th, 2021. Welcome to the show. I want to thank everyone who supports the program. Just quick reminders, the Venmo's at CVCPRV. Your help keeps the show alive. Your news helps me know what to talk about at Atlantic Homeland over in Telegram, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. And if I end up having to run fast, my health has not been great today. So hopefully I can get a good half hour out of this show, but we'll see. I'm doing the best I can, and then we're going to be dark tomorrow, so I have some time to recover before I put a sermon together for Sunday. I know I look terrible. I feel terrible. It's absolutely true. But today's show, we're going to jump right into it. What?
I was just saying.
No, yeah. So today's show is about the inflection point. And why do I call it the inflection point? We are on the verge of a narrative shift where there's divergent narratives globally, and I want to talk about why these exist.
That's hilarious.
What's it say?
It says you have no viewers.
I have no viewers yet. I have one like already.
And
It's
I'm
crazy.
well,
And
no,
you're
and I'm
watching.
watching.
I know, it's funny. Watching me is a little bit too meta for me. Anyway, meta's bad, right? So anyway, so what we're going to tell is the inflection point, and here's where we're at. I want to start by talking about what's happening in Austria. I want to talk about what's happening in America, and then I want to flash back to what happened when the COVID agenda kind of seemed to be going a different direction. So let's start by talking about what's happening in Austria, because we have to talk about that as the first point. Oh, thank you, Alice. I'm glad you enjoyed the Schizo stream. People love when I do those things. They're not very long and they're not very comprehensible, but sometimes people get things from them, and I won't pretend that they always make perfect sense, but they're a fun thing. So you kind of get to see a different side of how my mind works and sort of what I try to pull out of the madness. There's method in it. There certainly is. But to start with Austria, let's talk about that for a second. Austria has been having some of the harshest standards in terms of the V agenda throughout Europe, and they have been shutting people out of all sorts of things. But as of yesterday, they announced that they will be the first country in Europe to have compulsory Vs, which is to say that they will require their citizens to have this. And how they're going to go about it is a question that many people have been asking me about. We're still waiting for all the rollout information that's going to come out here, but I have found some details that are being pronounced. Well, there will be more to come. In the city of Vienna, which is the largest city in Austria and the capital as well, they're taking every citizen who hasn't yet already had the thing, or those who may have had one and not had the booster, and they're scheduling appointments for them and telling them you will come to the appointment. Now, we don't know yet exactly what's going to be the punishment if you don't come, because they're still in the carrot versus stick part of this. But I suspect what's going to happen is once they have all the people who then get through carrots and get on board with this, they will go ahead and turn the mob against the people who aren't there, and then they'll blame the people who aren't taking this for the medicine somehow getting them sick. It's a strange thing we live in today where the people who don't take the medicine are blamed for the people who taking the medicine who get sick. But it's something that has a lot of people worried. I was actually spending some time on poll this morning watching some supposedly anonymous people from Austria, not Australia. Australia's got its own problems, but Austria, who are trying to figure out what they're going to do to get out. And Germany looks like they may be following suit not too long behind them. Certainly, it's a terrible thing. It's something we've seen in that region. We've seen Croatia take moves to make it where people can't get the gas. Same in Slovenia and in that sort of Adriatic area. A lot of just bad policy. And the question is, what can people do to resist this who want to go forward? And the governments of the world, especially in Europe and in Western developed countries, are making it very difficult for people to do that. It certainly doesn't have to do with the amount of rates. We talked about Ireland, 94%. We talked about Gibraltar, 99%. And these are countries where a whole bunch of people have this, but they want to keep having this injected into them. And at some point, you have to say it's probably about more than big pharma profits, because countries are literally causing civil unrest that is incredibly detrimental to their economic well-being. So we're going to see how this plays out in Austria, and I suspect you're going to see much more resistance begin to harden. But I also suspect what you're going to see, and this is what happened actually in the communist revolution the first time with the Bolsheviks, is you'll see the cities come on board and people retreat to the countryside. Much like in the United States, how you see New York City being the center for some of the worst rules and regulations, and yet if you were to live in a rural area, you might be able to get through without too much interruption. Now, at the same time that's happening, and that broadly fits what we are seeing throughout Europe, where we see countries overwhelmingly going on board with the agenda. Hey, good to see you, Vicky. Glad you're here this morning. What we're going to see here in the United States is we've been seeing some turn back in the agenda. We saw that OSHA agree that they're going to comply with the Sixth Circuit Court ruling to not push the mandates. We see that resistance is stiffening in the House Republican caucus, and with the suggestion that they're going to have a very big victory in 2022 for not imposing these mandates. And even though we see the government pushing in areas where, and this is where it's happening. If you really want to know where the mandates are being pushed, it's in areas where government financing supports the whole industry. So, like healthcare is a perfect example. Good to see you, Superficial Tom. We're doing as well as we can. I've had a little bit of an upset stomach, and Lord knows Dana has been better, but your prayers and your help has definitely been out there helping us to try to get better, and hopefully we'll get there this weekend. We've been trying, I don't want to sound paranoid like we've been targeted, but Lord knows I can't figure out why we're as sick as we are. We are actually pretty much shut-ins that don't try to draw attention to ourselves, but who knows. So as we've seen this go forward, what we see are businesses that are heavily dependent on federal subsidy that are going and having the requirements of federal contracting, which, by the way, should be fought in courts, but like things like medicine and healthcare are the ones where people are overwhelmingly being forced into, as well as people who work for municipal governments. Of course, there's been some pushback, but nearly as much as we might have hoped. There are pending lawsuits between various police departments, fire departments, and military as well. So why do I say all this? I mean, and you know about the OSHA stuff. You know about the fact that there seems to be, as we see in Florida, actually, DeSantis went out there and signed 4 anti-mandate bills down there, and we're seeing this in more and more states. And yet, the question becomes, as we watch this, why is the American narrative divergent? And the answer is because Americans are getting tired of it. But this is where it gets interesting. So you'll remember that when COVID first broke, that we were all very concerned about, and this is when I was running CV Central, for those who have been with me a while, and I thought genuinely that this was a catastrophic thing we needed to be very worried about. And one of the tells I've always used in my analysis of how worried I should be is how the elites are acting. If they're acting like their lives are on the line, they probably believe it, whereas if they're acting like they're not. And as you'll recall, what happened was George Floyd overdosed on fentanyl, and that they started creating a whole social justice agenda around that. And I'm going to say it that way. That's the honest by God truth. That's how it actually went. And then BLM suddenly precipitated. The FBI went missing. I think they were preparing to go hunt down school boards. And then we had the burning of multiple cities. We saw Minneapolis get burned. We saw Seattle get occupied. We saw Portland and other cities, Baltimore, Ferguson, that's a St. Louis suburb, other places. A lot of different problems happened. And it changed the narrative, so people went back to fighting so that the agenda could move forward and that we would be focused on something else. And here in the West, why do I say we're at an inflection point in America? As my wife chases around her Orpington chicks, right? That what ends up happening is that as we hit that inflection point, what we would expect to see is that the narrative, if we are not paying enough attention to the COVID narrative, and you remember their job is to divide in Congress so they can go ahead and consolidate control and have us be at war against one another. It's funny to me that the Kyle Rittenhouse thing is just waiting perfectly. And you see the usual suspects being permitted to gather and go down there to Kenosha in numbers. And as usual, I mean, the same FBI who's so diligent about going forward and taking care of protect the politicians from the people who actually vote for them and the idea of integrity in elections are over there defending the paramilitaries that seek to destroy Western civilization. Not just this country, but hey, who doesn't follow orders for a paycheck, right? We live in a world where everyone's a mercenary, and it'd be better if people started to realize that, because people who think just having a badge or having made an oath to an entity that doesn't follow their own spirit of their law are actually really missing the point. But what I remember when BLM broke the first time, I knew at that point the COVID agenda, as presently put, was BS, because they would not have allowed people to gather in those numbers in the streets to cause problems if they were really worried about this getting everyone sick. They must have had the idea that certain people would be at risk, us, and certain people would not be at risk, them. And what they did was they understood that this was part of a larger, longer agenda. And so at that point, that's when my view began to shift. And I began to look at this like, what is this? Is it a long-term depopulation agenda? Is it a sterilization agenda? Is it about taking out the immune system? I mean, I've been reading some really interesting research which suggests that actually spikes produce pheromones that go out there that actually make people where they're more likely to be open to certain suggestions. And look, this is cutting edge stuff. I'll watch as it comes forward, and if there's compelling arguments, we'll take a look at it. It's too soon to say it's true. It's too soon to say it isn't true. What isn't too soon to say is that we see a divergent point, that we see in Europe what's happening is that they're pushing an all-in with the COVID agenda, with vax passports, with the green card systems, with innumerable boosters. And here in the United States, I believe, as well as Canada, they want to do the same thing. And that they haven't done so is because they simply can't get enough people to care. So There's a couple things they can do that. Number one is they can provide a distraction to buy themselves time to recalibrate, which is why I suspect we're going to see another round of race riots where we get to hear about how maybe now people will be getting sick, because I've already heard this, from climate change. They're literally blaming heart attacks on something called broken heart syndrome and climate change. I mean, it's like, honestly, it's
Do they
word
know what
salad.
broken heart syndrome is? It's like when you're like with like a life partner and
Yeah.
they die and then you die a week later. That's broken heart syndrome.
Yeah, no, I know, and they're saying that that's the reason why we're seeing myocarditis in kids. We're seeing all these people get sick and all of that, and so they're going to give us a new narrative boost. But here's where it gets ugly, and I give some credit to Mike Adams, who had a good and dark show on this last night. We listened to, which is that there's been a lot of rumors sitting in the background about smallpox. Not something you should be hearing a lot about. A lot of research into V's for that. A lot of research into how we can be kept safe from it theoretically. The usual bad actors in Africa, Gavi, Gates, all those people have been out there doing those sort of things. And I kind of wonder if this isn't the second blast that's going to come forward, whether they call it a variant, whether they blame it on the people who don't have it. I mean, if you want my worst case scenario, this is what I actually imagine they might do. And I have no evidence of this. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking, because I assume the worst of people, and I'm rarely disappointed when it comes to people who are in leadership, is that they'll say that some terrible plague will come out. They'll probably release it. They'll say the people who had this, because their immune systems are already compromised, the spikes being misappropriated and weakening the immune response in the T cells. What they'll end up doing is they'll have a lot of people be sick, a lot of people die, and they'll blame it on the people who didn't do things, who don't get sick because they relied on their natural immunity. And they might make it a religious narrative. I mean, I heard someone say this, and I genuinely believe it's a possibility, that they'll blame it on Christians praying for the judgment of God against people for their wickedness, and that they'll say that our religion is love and our religion is to support one another, and these people are evil and they don't have any place in our world. And if you look at how they've targeted certain groups, it's not hard to believe that'll happen. They need a fall guy. I mean, what are they going to do? They can't blame white people for absolutely everything, because too many of them are white. They're going to need something that excludes the people they want to save, and that's probably the group they're going to come after. So in the interim play, what would you expect to see? You might expect to see, if they need to go ahead and get people scared again, and they need to get the Karens out there demanding, screaming that they're out there, and that's the left wing base, by the way, of the people who are presently in governor or in government. They're going to have to get them something that makes people sick enough where people are going to go out there and they're going to support that. So at this point, I would expect we're probably not too far from seeing real sickness come back again. And I would warn you, a lot of people, when COVID first broke, thought they were very smart, because they're like, I'm not going to believe in this. I'm going to go out there and I didn't get sick. And you didn't, because you were lucky, not because you were smart. The smart play when that thing broke was to sit back and saw what happened. I did it for a couple months. A lot of us did. Now, went ahead and we adjusted our expectations accordingly. And I understand that a lot of people say, oh, you can't believe anything they'll say. And you're right. But do you really believe these people who have shown such casual contempt for you, in whatever country you live in, by the way, that they wouldn't have any problem with a mass death situation if it would go ahead and serve their interest? I think you need to ask that question very carefully and be circumspect. We're coming into a Thanksgiving weekend, right? And that there's going to be a ton of people traveling all over the place. So if you ever wanted an opportunity to distribute things around travel system, because remember, that's what they want to constrain: travel, fuel, food, the ability to provide. So if they're going to do something ugly, this would be a perfect weekend to do it, because the narrative is running against them, right? That the people who are getting over COVID are there. And the bottom line is, if they hold on too long, what's going to happen is, what are they calling it? The unexplained death numbers that are not attributed to any known cause are going through the roof, well above norms in every country. And so they're coming up with these ridiculous ideas, like we talked about, broken heart syndrome, all these things. Like they're creating a sudden adult death syndrome. They're just making up word salad to keep you busy, because they know what it is. It's the same reason that Pfizer has now asked, or the FDA for Pfizer has asked for them to go ahead and hide what the results of their research was for over 30 years. It's the same thing from the companies who are literally making $1,000 a second to put this out there, okay? They are looking for a way to shift the stink, and they need to do it. And whether that means civil unrest and that we get drawn into a fight, or whether that means the next version of sickness, that's absolutely it. And you're right, Superficialdom. By the way, PCR testing seems to be a front for DNA sequencing. There was a story that broke 2 days ago. I can't remember what company it was, but it was in the UK, about how there was a third-party vendor who was taking those swabs, and they were trying to sell the DNA results to different people. And the rumor is, for what it's worth, is that all these things are ending up with the Chinese. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's certainly worth going out there. There's a reason reason why they want to have those swabs go right up against your brain, I have assumed two things. Number one, that they're trying to collect information on you. And number two, what they're also doing is if there's something on some of those swabs, some sort of element, maybe graphene or something, that perhaps it's the case that what they're actually trying to do is get that into past the blood brain barrier. Now, we don't know all that. We'll have to watch and see if it goes forward. But, a lot of things, it's kind of interesting. About 2 weeks ago, we were really following hot on the heels of what's in this. And we were following the Hydra vulgaris, we were following the graphene bits. And it seems like nobody's talking about it all of a sudden. And I want to know why nobody's talking about it. It's a strange quiet that's come out. And I don't attribute any ill will towards anyone. Maybe just the science, the actual science of people who are out there doing it, is taking a moment to go ahead and work itself out. And that certainly can and might be the case. If you want to know why I'm holding this so funny, dog is determined to get on camera. Come on, dog. You want to be on camera? There you go. Dog, say hi to the fans. See, she's just trying to nose her way in here. I have a tendency to call every dog dog, so Cassie gets called dog, but it's the way it is. I do that with every animal. I don't know why, probably because I'm autistic and retarded. But as we come to the inflection point, what I'm saying to you is I think that given that the previous narrative is falling apart and given the various problems out there, we're due for a major narrative shift. And I sort of expect that riots out of the Rittenhouse trial may be used as a signal point to go ahead and have multiple riots happen in different places to try to foment certain problems. Now, what choices do they have? Let's say he's fine. Let's just consider and Rittenhouse isn't my big thing to cover, but I will say the consequences of this. If he's found not guilty, then you'll have insta riots in the streets that will be permitted, and they'll say, well, it's social justice, and the media will cover for them like they always do. But let's look at the other way. Let's say that he's found guilty. We've been seeing that the jury's been intimidated. We saw today in the news that NBC and MSNBC have been banned by the courtroom for judge because literally they were going around taking pictures of the jury, and they were instructing their people on Twitter of all places to follow them so they could go ahead and use that intimidation. But if in fact we find this kid who used self-defense found guilty, that what will happen is at that point it will be probably the last death knell in the coffin of this idea that people who use violence and self-defense can rely on the legal system. And what happens is when people have given up on the idea that a fair jury trial can be had, it won't be long before people realize that this is now going to be a fight to the death and that they're not going to surrender under any notice. I mean, look at what's happening in Austria as an example. If they're going to say, you will take the jab or you will be done. And that's one of those things you need to be aware of, that problem is going to come, and that may come to the U.S. And what they want to do here is not that they are afraid of the fight. They seem to want the fight, but they want to have the fight picked on terms where they can say, well, we're the bad guys. We're the ones who are against law and order and justice and all that. And so that is what we've been watching. Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. It always happens when I do things later. I get a ton of texts during this, and I have to blow them out to get back on the channel. Let's see. Superficialdom writes, strange contour narrative opinions here in Australia with the federal government backing off the mandates while state premiers are in full retard fascist mode. Seems like confusion reigns supreme. Same thing's happening here in the United States with governors like Brown and Inslee and Newsom. We've been seeing this over and over again. Let's see. Watched a fascinating take on this where it reacts as soon as the GMO meats are ingested. Neural break zombies. Could be. I mean, that certainly fits the prion BME thing. I tell you what, if you guys want to go down a conspiracy rabbit hole, one thing that Dana and I've been watching, and it got canceled, so it's sort of interesting, is they had a show Utopia on Amazon Prime that sort of seems like the best predictive programming of this, but it was based on, I want to say it's 2011, but don't quote me on that. There was a British show of the same thing that basically was about how they were using examples of how they would have an intervention solution that would lead to mass sterility, and that there was a bunch of death happening around it, and control mechanisms were being put in place for the people. And we're starting to see that. And this is the global social credit score. This is the global system. This is the beast system. And like I tried to hint to you in my schizo stream last night, I'll try to make it more coherent for the people who are sane amongst us, which if you're watching this show, you're probably not, but I'll do it anyway, is that we are fighting against this idea of logic against faith. And we're fighting against this idea that we are being blinded by so many facts that we lose the narrative of what's against our interests. We make a bunch of individual decisions that seem rational and sane and that people who don't know any better can follow, but ultimately they are the traps that lead us into cages. And we're going to have to figure out a way to avoid that going forward. Now, what I would suggest to you is what I've been saying for a long time. You need to organize organize collectively, have an idea of what you're believing. It starts with start. I mean, actually, it starts. You have to get your own head right in the game. You have to realize this isn't necessarily a game you're going to win. You're just going to decide what rules you're going to play it by. You just decide you're not going to lose, and that's why I always tell people, get right with the Lord. And I know for some people that seems like the most abstract, abstruse thing, but it really isn't. If you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, what ends up happening is you start seeing the world for what it is, which is a place we're trying to escape from. And then you start to understand all the various traps that are out there. You stop looking at the question of how do I have the best outcomes, and you begin to understand there are no good outcomes. There's only the realization that this is a trap and you need to escape, like your soul depends on it. Because by the way, it does. And that's where we're at. But right now, that the world is being trapped in a set of problems that are going to lead to a set of solutions. All of you guys have been understanding for many years the problem of dialectic. They have to make the problem so bad that you'll accept whatever happy solution. Remember, if any of you saw the 19 or if you read the 1984 book or you watched the 1984 movie, you remember the 2 minutes hate, where everyone would get up and they go like this and they'd scream, "Rah, rah, 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 rah." Dog, you want to bark? And after the end 2 minutes, they go do 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 do, and Big Brother would come up and be like,
What are you talking about?
1984. That's what happened in the 2 minutes. Hey, and the reason why is it's psychological programming. What they're doing is they're building up just this huge serotonin release of anger and madness. And then they're going to say, hey, we have a solution. But they're going to do it in more than just that way. They're going to have something that gets everyone sick, and they're going to have tech to solve the problem. And this is the problem that you end up with. Tech is going to be everything. And the tech that's going to have to be out there is going to basically have to override your immune system. So basically, it's going to pick who lives and who doesn't live and how they live. And then from there, it's not much a big thing to integrate into people's minds. They've kind of used your immune system as the back door to get to your mind, although they've been able to do that through images for years. And I make the argument, actually, I think it's a good argument, that our image obsessed culture is actually part of the so called beast system, where words have a solidity and an imaginative effect, whereas images just become an entrapment where we have to go in further and further. And I say that as someone who literally watches Japanese cartoons for fun, but just because I do a thing doesn't mean I don't realize the consequences of doing a thing. And I would say you got to spend at least as much time in the Word as you do in the world of images. And if that means reading documents, I'm not telling you what it means. I mean, obviously, reading the Bible should be a big part of it, but that have the ability to see things that exist independent of this reality, that sit on their own logic, that would be actually probably a good step. All right. So beyond that, I've been watching what else I see that's out there in the news cycle, and I suspect we probably won't have too crazy of a weekend. Although I would say this, that well, I actually no. Let me retract my own comment. If Rittenhouse's jury decision happens as I suspect it should on Friday, what we will see, and it might be a mistrial with a hung jury. That's very likely because it seems like there's certain people there from the bits and pieces that I'm reading that just want to social signal. I mean, this is the problem. It's jury trials are not really the answer either because this is the problem with the whole democratic ideal. If your people are crap, and I hate to say it, but morally speaking, our people really don't have the foundation to sit on. What will happen is you'll have bad outcomes when you have mass decisions being made. But there's probably not a better solution in the short term and in a different age. I'm not saying it was a bad idea for when they put it in, but for now, it's not the right idea. So those are the things I'm kind of keeping an eye on. Keeping an eye on other countries. I'm obviously keeping an eye on what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, all of those things. Belarus shut down the pipeline supposedly for repairs for 3 days to Western Europe. Not sure if that's just an example of them flexing muscles, but there are a lot of plays to play in this geopolitical war going on. Good to see you, Lone Wolf. Let's see. Alice writes, look how much Elon does almost simultaneously. Yeah, he's a total autist. He's kind of got an interesting story. I don't know what I make of him. I go back and forth on that. All right, good to see you, Superficial Dumb. I will see you later. So as we watch these things go forward, one other thing I think is interesting, just keep this in the back of your mind. Hillary Clinton, they dug her up from whatever fossil she's under there, and she was out there taking shots on Bitcoin because she was saying cryptos threatened the central bank fiat control of the world. I think that, if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if BTC ain't up about 5% on the day because Lord knows that harpy scares everyone away from anything. It's kind of a really sad story. She seemed like you see those pictures of a little girl and you wonder what horrible things were done to make her into the person she is. forgiveness. This is one of the things, the hardest lessons the Bible is to teach that you want to forgive your enemies and you want to pray for them to find their way to God. But some people are so evil, we really do struggle
She's
with
a
that.
high level witch.
She is a high level witch, and yet, you know what? We should still pray for people to come out of that, even though we should not let things be done to us, and we should never give a person like that power over us. It's just, it's a really hard thing. I mean, how we confront evil, because we can't out evil evil. If we try to do that, we always fail. And I've been around a lot of political movements whose ideas were to out clever evil or out evil evil. You just have to let evil self destruct, and that's why we're kind of sitting back, building our society of exclusion, watching these things happen, and you know what? Keeping safe, take care of your families, get some food, get some resources together. I did read that because of the landslide in Vancouver, the wheat and soy crops that were supposed to be coming in from the what's it called, the Kelowna Valley that's over there, it's going to heavily impact those prices. So if you are exposed to that, or if you're worried about that, you're making a run on Kikoman or Bimbo bread, you might want to be aware those are things, those prices that might be highly sensitive to that as you watch going forward. Do I think a mistrial or acquittal would benefit our cause or weaken it? Um, I don't know. I mean, I think that a mistrial is a highly likely outcome. I don't know how, given the performance of that jury, of that prosecutor rather, that you could find him reasonably guilty. Um, I'm surprised the judge didn't get more involved. But the thing about it is these things are all show trials at this point. This has been kind of set up. The fact that the FBI was literally sitting there treating this as an opportunity to watch every little bit of it after the Blake thing, I think is sort of telling. And I think that I think the agenda will not be, how should I say, pushed aside for the idea of justice. So, but I do think that ultimately, whatever happens, acceleration is going to be the outcome of this, because this thing has no center. It can't hold. It's going to pull itself off the rails. So I guess it doesn't really matter so much to me, except in terms of what the timing is. I would expect to be forward. So Alice writes, Putin looks very serious. This hypersonic test is a grave warning. We should talk about that. Putin had a press conference, and he was out there saying that the West doesn't respect any of their red lines, that they literally are looking to put potentially nuclear missiles no further than 20 kilometers from the border. And Germany, interestingly, wants nuclear missiles out of their country. Poland would be more than happy to have them in there. And if you consider Kaliningrad, or Königsberg as it used to be known, that's a real concern for the Russians. The Russians have learned that you can't play nice with the West, and so that's one of the reasons you see hybrid warfare. Although it does look like Belarus is starting to relent just a little bit with the number of refugees they're allowing in there, because Poland has held the line pretty hard. There may be some people that are being directly transported from Belarus to Germany without ever touching foot in Poland. That's possible, and why Germany would want that? Well, the destruction of the German people is something that's been sought probably for 100 years. And I say that's a very sad thing. I mean, part of that was self inflicted, part of it is. But then again, when you look at how Austria is treating their people, it's funny how they kind of go back to the old ways pretty quick. So I don't know.
It's sad because that's where my family's from.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, it's just, and the problem is Germans follow orders. It's like that episode of Top Gear, be like, what was it? Clarkson tells that joke. He says, you have to wear a seatbelt, and the American says, yeah, but what if you don't? Or if you don't have a license, he's like, this cannot be done. This is against the rules. And the Germans are going to have to some point figure out how to bend the rules. When a German learns flexibility, the chosen days for the European people will come. I don't know if it's going to happen this way, because I happen to know a little bit about Germans, and not only do Germans have a rule for everything, but they have a rule for the exceptions to the rule, which can overwrite the original rule. And that they have in their Teutonic autism, they have a level of precision that's literally terrifying. And yet,
why are you making fun of me right now?
I'm not saying anything about you.
This is exactly what you say to me all the time.
And yet, they are a passionate folks. So at some point, they're going to go Super Saiyan, level up, reach 9,000, and then we're going to see something that looks like it's stepped straight out of Valhalla. Um, let's see. All right. Do I think white reactionaries were agitated in the event of a conviction? No. I will tell you this. If you want to know what reactionaries are taking a look at, they're taking a look at the trial in Charlottesville, which is not getting a lot of media attention, of Chris Cantwell. And he actually, from what I'm reading, is actually doing a pretty amicable job defending himself. They got Kessler, they got Spencer down there. And look, whatever you believe or don't believe about all that, people have the right to have free speech. And the sad thing of that story is they were railroaded into a situation where it could only go very badly. Now, I'm not a big believer of public protest. You know that. I think it's counter-effective. But I will say this, that one of the things their attention is drawn in is somewhere else. So Alice asked a question: if I had power, how do we deal with Russia, China, and Iran? So I'm going to assume, for the purposes of that question, because I actually wrote a book about this and the con, what you would do if you were the United States president. If I was the United States president, what I would do is I would annex Canada. I would go ahead and say to the Chinese, "You can have Taiwan." I would say to the Russians, "You could have Ukraine," and I would try to have an understanding between them. Japan is the issue we can't give up. If Taiwan's the requirement, that's fine. Korea can be neutralized like Austria, and Australia would be part of the Western sphere. I think that the English speaking world, by and large, needs to come together, and I think Australia and New Zealand could represent a southern flank for a sort of developing American empire. I mean, and this is how history worked for most of from the 17th to the 19th centuries. That great empires would carve up other things, and I would say, and you would rationalize the immigration policies, and maybe even the UK would bring it in there. But this idea that the borders exist, if you were forced to play in this world at that level, that's what you have to do. Mind you, you're not solving the problem. You're buying time. You can only solve the problem if you take over the education system, purge the culture, and you're going to have propaganda for 30 years to undo that, not to mention change your basic demography. And you're going to have to include the people you have. And for America, that means you'd have to go to a full on Christian republic. And people aren't ready for that. And I think, honestly, it's easier to have it all fall apart and start anew from smaller levels than have the bigger ones. And I think it's more stable to have lots of small states than big ones. But if you're in charge of the United States, or if any of these other countries, you have to do that. And I do expect the EU, since you're over there in England, or are you in England or Wales? I can't remember which. Anyway, you're over there in the UK somewhere. What ends up happening is that I suspect the EU will pull together much more tightly, and that is UK, as sort of the odd man out, is going to have to figure out what sort of sphere they're going to go in, and they'll probably go in the American one. You would think Ireland's an interesting tweener country. I don't know. It would be kind of interesting if Northern Ireland became part of Ireland and they all became part of some confederation with America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the old Five Eyes arrangement. But, when you look at the horrible ideas that are being proposed by the House of Windsor, you look at sort of how Meghan Markle's being set up as the heir apparent to become this heroic figure that unites the British crown with the American presidency, you can see there are lots of like black swan events that maybe they're preparing certain outcomes from. Could be a distraction, could be something worth watching. Not really sure. But I know Prince Charles was out there saying that, if he ever becomes king, they're looking to militarize the society. I know that in the UK, they're looking to buy robot dogs to totally displace the existing people. The future of the UK is like a Black Mirror episode. And, that's what happens when you don't have weapons and the ability to do that. So it's going to be a problem. And in America, the future we're looking at looks like something like Srebrenica. So I don't know what, you do about that either, except that maybe their plan is to directly technologically induce people and take control, or as our friend Superficial Dumb said, maybe turn people into zombies in the end. I mean, and some people say, well, those are just dramatic. Why can't it just go forward and people will go forward with regular life? And the answer is that reality as presently constituted really isn't meeting anyone's needs. So I do think that in the happy outcome, we're going to be driven more and more into a fantasy world where we are going to basically be harvested for our energy by AI sort of thinking that we let do the work for us. And that's something that, they'll call it synergy. They'll say, hey, you're helping to go ahead and provide energy so we don't have to have nuclear power and we have coal power. It'll be the green red thing, the combination you always see, that it'll be body communism, that, you get exercise, you give a little bit to that, the computer gives you a world to play in, and we don't have to see the misery that's around us. And the rich countries will do it because they don't want to be part of the poor. The poor countries will be exploited and no one will care because they never did, and that'll be the future. And then they'll need bad guys to target, and the people who say, well, everyone has value, or that that we shouldn't be part of a machine should go forward. Those will be the ones who will be targeted, and foremost amongst them will obviously be Christians. I tell you one other thing too. A lot of people talking about this don't know what I want to make of it yet, but I reserve the right to comment on it more later. Is Mike Flynn going out there saying we should all have one religion? Kind of
Wait,
funny to
he
see a
said that?
Catholic. Well, yeah, that's what all those things were about. He said, "Wouldn't it be nice if we all had one religion?"
That's
And
what he said, though?
yeah, apparently
That's
that's what the
terrible.
thing
I
said. I
don't
mean,
trust
he's
him.
well, yeah. I mean, he's nominally, I believe, a Catholic
Are
from
you going
Rhode
to tell the
Island.
story?
No, I'm not going to tell the story.
Come
I
on,
mean,
tell the story.
I had a
Tell
little
the story.
correspondence with him during the 2016 elections, and how should I put it? I don't want to go too deep into it, but let's just put it this way. I think he knows a lot more than he lets on. Obviously, as the head of what was he, the director of national intelligence, and he ran the military intelligence agency or the defense intelligence agency, he would have known a lot of things. And some of the craziest conspiratorial ideas you'd ever hear were ideas that he seemed more than willing to contemplate. So, if there is a worldwide agenda, I'll say this: Mike Flynn would have known about it, and I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't a party to it. A lot of people who are smart observers think he's setting up to be a dark horse candidate in 2020. I do think Trump is far more damaged than people realize by this agenda. I think the Republicans, if they have to go that way, I don't have any faith in elections. I don't vote. I don't get involved with it. But I think DeSantis would be a better choice as a political observer. He has a lot more upside, and he doesn't have the same problems. But it's a cult, so you have to deal with that. But what I wonder is, you see this push over and over again toward a singular global religion, and that's something we would expect. We've seen the Catholic Church heavily involved with it. We've seen Pope Francis, the apostate Jorge Bergoglio, going out there with it. And we've seen people like Archbishop Vigano, Carlo Maria Vigano, going out there and standing against this. And credit to him, by the way. God bless him. I didn't see who just sent me $25, but thank you, man. I appreciate that. God bless. Um, so as we watch this thing go forward, I do wonder how this is going to come forward, and I do see that there's a lot of push. I know there's some big meeting that supposedly was being brokered between the Saudis, the Egyptians, and the Syrians, with the Israelis to maybe put Assad back in power and bring him over to the Western side, which is interesting because it means A, they're worried about Iran, B, they're worried about Russia, and C, they don't trust Turkey. NATO doesn't trust Turkey. So as we watch these sort of strange wars and rumors of wars play out in the Middle East, and the sand shift in the hourglass like a bad soap opera, there's certainly the potential for different wars by proxy to break out that will draw people into it. But the main actors remain as they do. The United States versus China will be the key element of this. And, China's going to have whatever dominance it has in there. It's an evil regime, but they do have a certain power to them. And when I say, I would give them Taiwan, I would only do that if it was understand that it was an imperial world. In this world, the United States, probably after their departure from Afghanistan, is forced to defend Taiwan. Otherwise, they'll lose their alliances in India and Japan. And it's interesting, China's been moving a lot of troops to the Indian border. But I do sort of think it's not going to start in that region. I think it's going to be either in the Middle East or Eastern Europe. And I think the Russians are getting tired of our BS. And I think Putin's maybe had enough. I don't know. But it's kind of weird because they're on board with certain parts of the agenda as well. So we'll have to see what happens. But I do think, for Russia's perspective and from a military perspective and a leverage perspective, they're better off waiting until it gets colder. The ground will be frozen. They can move better. They're set up for a cold weather military. That the gas prices will be jumping. The food will be more scarce. And they'll be ready to do the sort of things that are out there. So something to keep an eye on. But on top of all this, remember that at some point, every country is pushing this agenda. So something above them all is pushing it. And that you would expect, if more people need to get sick and certain things need to be blamed, that's going to be coming. Now, some people might say I'm just being too dismal by sharing that, but hey, I look at the evidence of what they've done before. I look at the research they've funded. It's interesting how all these diseases who were cured have started coming back all of a sudden. Come here. Well, you want to be on camera? No, do not. All right, we've got a little
Aw,
Orpington chick that wants to be on camera.
that was so cute.
That is cute. So anyway, all right. So the chickens are overrunning me today. Dana has a couple of chicks up with her she's playing with. So I will just close by saying that we have a holiday weekend coming. People's guard is going to be down. Not a crazy time to expect something nutty to happen. So I would keep your head on a swivel from about Friday to the end of next week. And if things settle down before that, between then, I think we'll probably okay between now and Christmas. I could be wrong about that, and we always have to watch. There's always black swans. There's La Palma still out there. There's geological instability, and there's astronomical events. So who knows? It's always fun. But if there's something coming, we'll see it, because Lord knows we spend way too much time watching news. I want to give some love and credit to the wife. She does a lot of the research, so I don't have to, because I get too depressed looking at it. And I've been living in fantasy land as much as I can the last few days, because it's just too sad for me to look at this world anymore. And yet, that's part of the story too. We need to imagine a world where we have some purpose and meaning. So, Heavenly Father, we pray that you show us the blessings of this world and remind us that we can become citizens of heaven while we are still here on earth. That's what Jesus instructs us. And that if we are able to go ahead and find that way, we ask that you lead us to it so we can have joy and try to overcome some of our suffering and stand up for one another and stand up for your word here. And that we can find a way to be better people by following in your image. So we thank you for the sacrifice you made, Jesus, but also the lessons you taught us. So in God's name, I just pray that that wisdom goes forward to everyone. Amen. So, thank you again for tuning in for another show. It's slightly shorter than usual, but considering how I'm feeling, I'm actually pretty happy. This is the longest I've made it without having to run to use a facility. So, I'm actually doing pretty good today. And that's terrible. You probably didn't want to know that, but honestly, that's why the show was late this morning. It was really bad. So, thank you, everyone. I will probably see you on Sunday. Don't expect to do a show Friday night or Saturday. I just haven't been feeling well enough. But you never know. I might come on for 10 minutes and share something if it strikes or if news breaks that requires me to comment. If Rittenhouse gets decided and things get funny, I'll probably come on and say something. But we'll see what happens with that. You guys all be safe, be smart, and just, like I said, keep working, looking for friends. And remember, just because something was done once one way, it may not be the other way. I'm really concerned about them releasing some new medical malady on people. And don't count on your immunity to protect you from things that are really, really bad. If smallpox gets out there, you got to stay apart. You got to just bunker in as long as you can. If that's what it ends up being, best advice I can give to you. It's no joke. Okay. God bless. You guys have a good day.